introductory session, and that'll be Caroline as well. And just a quick reminder before I pass over to Caroline that all the sessions that we've run previously on mental well-being, they're still on the larder should you need them, or give me a shout if you need anything. Anyway, over to Dr. Caroline Burrow.
Thanks, Becky. Hi, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen with you just to start off. Make sure that that's working. Can everyone see that okay? So as Becky said, I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about motivation during a pandemic. So we were just chatting before we started about how we're all thoroughly fed up with this pandemic now. Do you know that actually it's had a huge impact on our lives? And, you know, what helped us to stay motivated maybe at the beginning and in the first lockdown, we're maybe struggling a little bit more now. So we're just going to run over some basics about what motivation is and just go through those basic ways of how do we re-motivate ourselves when we're living through these difficult times. So do feel free to unmute yourselves and ask questions as we go along. So that's not a problem, or you can type into the chat box if you've got any questions. There will hopefully be a little time for questions at the end, but I'm conscious I've got quite a lot to go through. But as I say, if you've got any questions as we're going along, feel free to either unmute or type it into the chat box. So what is motivation? What do we mean by motivation? So, oops. That's not a good start. So motivation is a process, and it initiates and guides and maintains our goal-orientated behaviours. It's a really complex process and involves biological, emotional, social and cognitive factors. And it's all about what activates us to do something, what directs us into focusing on something, and what maintains our behaviour in doing something. So there are many, many different psychological theories of motivation, and we're not going to go into all of those today, but we're just going to touch upon really basic tips to keep motivation going and why motivation might be affected in a pandemic. So you've probably come across this before, so but we're just going to run over the types of motivation. So in extrinsic motivation is motivation that comes from outside of ourselves. So this is when we are motivated to do an action because of something outside of ourselves. So that might be some kind of rewards, it might be money, it might be points, it might be peer pressure, it might be achievement, accolation. So all of these things are what motivate us to do something from outside of ourselves. We also have intrinsic motivation, and that's the motivation that comes from inside ourselves. So this is where we're motivated to do a task because it gives us a sense of achievement or mastery. It helps us to connect with other people. So it gives us a sense of belonging or a sense of autonomy in our actions, or it might give us some kind of meaning in our lives. So these are our intrinsic motivations. So there's three main components to motivation. There's the activation. So that's the get up and go, the actual decision to initiate some kind of behavior. Then we have the persistence, and this is the concentrated effort, the continual moving towards a goal, despite obstacles that would come in our way. And then we have the intensity, and so this is the vigor, the effort that goes into pursuing a certain goal. And when we talk about goals, this could be anything from getting up in the morning and having a shower, to climbing a mountain, to getting a massive project done at work. So the components are the same. We've got to start it, and then we've got to maintain it essentially, and then it's how much effort we actually put into it. So why might we lose motivation? Why might we struggle to engage in those aspects of a task? So sometimes it's because we're trying to avoid discomfort. So we might have uncomfortable emotions such as frustration or boredom or vulnerability. So if we're doing some kind of task, some kind of behavior that we find difficult, we might feel some frustration about that. You know, we might not feel comfortable with not being very good at something or finding it hard. We might feel bored by a task. It may be that a task is too easy, that we've done it 101 times before and we don't want to do it anymore because we're sick to the back teeth of it. Or we may kind of feel some vulnerability in a task. It may feel overwhelming to us. And so when we have these uncomfortable emotions, we naturally try and avoid the emotions. And therefore, in avoiding the emotions, we're not motivated to carry out the task. We may have self-doubt, so we may not feel that we can cope with the task. It may feel like it's too hard for us, or the task and also the distress associated with it. So I just can't deal with this, I can't cope with it, so I'm not going to do it. We may feel overwhelmed. So when we've got lots of other things going on, we lose motivation because it's difficult to focus on that one thing. So I think we've all probably been in that situation where we've just got so many tasks to do that you don't even know where to start. And so you start procrastinating. You have another cup of coffee. You might wander around the house a little bit more, or you might suddenly decide that you want to clean, to anything to avoid that task, because actually there's too much to kind of break down. It just feels too overwhelming. We may have a lack of commitment to a goal. So sometimes when we are motivated extrinsically, so from outside of ourselves, we might feel pressurized to do a task. So we may feel obligated or under some kind of peer pressure, but actually we're not that interested in it. So we're likely to lose motivation over time if we don't have that intrinsic motivation as well. So we need a balance of the two. Perfectionism, so we'll talk a little bit more about perfectionism in more detail later on, but perfectionism is very dangerous in helping us to lose motivation. So it can lead to a fear of failure because we have this need to do everything flawlessly. And then what comes with perfectionism, what comes with that lack of motivation is procrastination. And again, we'll talk about some tips about how to overcome procrastination in a bit. But that's the vicious circle of lacking motivation and never getting started, putting it off, finding other things to do instead of the task. And also, we may lose motivation as a symptom of a mental health issue. So it's a common symptom of depression, anxiety, and as we'll talk about a little bit later, it's also a common symptom of other physical illnesses as well. So those could be all reasons why we might lose motivation. Now, at the moment, we're dealing with this global pandemic. And have been for a year now. You know, it's been a year, we've been coping with this, and there's obviously been huge changes to our lives as a result of that. So, of course, the pandemic is going to affect our motivation. So, we're kind of living, as you can see from the little cartoon there, we're living under the burden of lots of other things going on. We might have worry and anxiety about the pandemic, about our own health, about other people's health, frustration and anger about rules maybe, or about how governments are dealing with things, about how other people are dealing with the pandemic. We might be feeling that sense of burnout, you know, that we've just been coping with this for too long. And what happens in times of stress and uncertainty is that one of our primary thinking parts of our brain, our prefrontal cortex, which is kind of this bit of our brain, begins to shut down in times of stress and uncertainty. And that prefrontal cortex is needed for critical thinking, for decision making and focus. And all of these cognitive processes are needed to keep us motivated. So physiologically, our brain is shutting down, so it's going to be harder for us to motivate ourselves. Additionally, we might be dealing with other stresses in our life. So as a result of the pandemic, we might have some stress around job security for ourselves or loved ones, financial issues. And so when we're dealing with all these other stresses, it's difficult to stay motivated. Changes to routines, as we're going to talk about in a moment, routine is a really good way of motivating ourselves to initiate and maintain behaviour. And if our routines have changed, we find it difficult to get into a new routine, so we lose motivation. Feeling overstretched and juggling responsibilities. So particularly, you know, if we're trying to work at home and there's lots of other things going on, if our support networks that we normally had to look after children or to look after dependents have been taken away. We might find that we've got many things that we're juggling at the moment that we don't normally do. So that can affect our motivation. And as I said, obviously mental health affects our motivation, and it's understandable that our mental health might be affected by the pandemic and everything associated with it. So we're all having much less social contact than we normally do, face-to-face social contact. And so we may have that lack of social support, which is going to affect our motivation. It's likely that we have less extrinsic motivators at the moment. So particularly when we think about work, we're maybe not in the office, we're maybe not seeing our peers as much. If we're somebody who is involved in sports, we maybe aren't seeing the people that we normally train with, we're not seeing our friends down the gym. So having to do things on our own and rely on our intrinsic motivation means that we're maybe slightly less motivated than usual. We might find also that micromanagement from bosses, and I'm sure none of you experience this at work, but that can actually be demotivating, that we all like to have a sense of autonomy, and in fact that was one of the intrinsic motivators, that sense of autonomy motivates us to engage in tasks and pursue tasks. And actually, because we're working at home potentially, or because working patterns are different, bosses might be trying to help but maybe micromanaging, and that can often reduce motivation for us. And of course, this pandemic doesn't just affect us day to day, it kind of potentially makes us think about everything that's going on in the world at the moment. We might question the meaning in life with all these changes that's happening and the threats that we've been facing. So it can lead us into a kind of mini existential crisis, and that's going to affect our motivation. And then we've got good old distractions. So particularly when we're thinking about the workplace, you know, when we work in an office or when we work out on site, we don't necessarily have the same distractions as we have at home when we've got relatives, family members, maybe in the house, trying to share a workspace, trying to look after children or other dependents, trying to manage with pets running around. So, and also there's lots of other distractions, isn't there, to rather than to get on with things. So Netflix is just there in the corner. So it's much easier to distract ourselves and lose motivation that way. So what can we do about it? How can we improve our motivation? So we're going to talk a little bit about some ways of improving motivation. So we're going to talk about routines, goal setting, rewards, connecting with others, self-compassion, and just that sense of just getting on and doing it. So just taking that first step to whatever task we're working on. So thinking about how we challenge procrastination, how we challenge perfectionism. Lots of this you will have come across before, so I don't think that any of this is going to be new to you, but it's good to refresh it, because these are the things that we kind of lose when we become demotivated and when we're experiencing everything that we're experiencing in the pandemic. So there's lots on this slide now. The slides are going to be available to you after the session, so don't feel like you have to get all this down. But essentially, routines and time scheduling are really good for not only activating our behaviour, but for keeping going on a goal, to sort of keep pursuing that behaviour that we're doing. So they help to keep us motivated, they help us to develop good habits. So creating daily or weekly routines is really important. Try and keep a schedule that's similar to your pre-coronavirus schedule, if that was working for you. If that wasn't working for you, if you found that you weren't motivated with that schedule, improve it. Find a way of making that better. Use this pandemic to your advantage. It's important to have a set wake up and sleep time. So that's something that a lot of people have been talking to me about in this pandemic, that because they're not getting up at their normal times, because maybe they're not having to travel to work or they don't have to take the kids to school, that it's kind of shifting the day around, or that people are having difficulty sleeping, so they're staying up late. So try, even if you don't have to get up for a certain time, try and keep to a normal wake up time. Do a time and energy audit. So when do you work best? Now, one of the advantages of the pandemic is for some people, we have a bit more flexibility about how we work. So find out what activities drain your energy, what give you energy, and what times of day do you work better. Plan difficult tasks when you have the most energy, and in mix and match your tasks. So if you know that you've got some difficult tasks, mix them with some downtime or some less difficult tasks, because that's helps us to keep our energy levels up, which helps us to keep our motivation. Work in small blocks at a time with little breaks. So we start losing concentration after about 20-30 minutes on a task. So have a little stretch, have a little break, and then get back to it. Have a get to work time and a finish time. So if you don't have set times when you have to clock in, set these for yourself so that you structure your day more. So it doesn't mean that you're struggling to get to work at a certain time, you're putting off getting to work, or that you work overtime, because that's the other danger with not having a set schedule, is that we work too much and then we lose motivation over time because we become burnt out. Set regular meal times, regular breaks and downtime. And in the downtime, if you're somebody who's spending a lot of time online, get offline. Have a break from a screen, get outside if you can. And make sure that you include self-care and well-being into your routine, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. News and social media can have a huge impact on our mood and on our motivation, and not in a very helpful way at the moment. So if you're finding that you're struggling with that, put a limit on how much you engage with that. And as we'll talk about in our section on connecting with others, synchronize your routine with others, because that can help to motivate us more. And make sure that you're finding time to do something that gives you joy and purpose in your routine, not just work, not just chores. Make to-do lists and don't underestimate how long tasks take. Plan and prioritize tasks and add them to a schedule or a diary so that you've got a fixed time when you're going to do them, and also allowing some flexibility for those things that come in, the children that interrupt time or the emergency that comes in. So motivating yourself to get out of bed. So this is something that, again, a lot of people that I've been talking to is having real trouble with, is that because they maybe don't have the same routine, is just to actually get up and get out of bed. So don't look at your phone the first thing in the morning. So most of us sleep with our phones beside us and we think, oh, well, we'll just check my messages, I'll just check my email, I'll just have a quick scroll on Facebook or whatever. The problem with doing that is then you're in bed for another 20 minutes to 3 hours, depending on how much you're scrolling. So get up and make your bed. So one of the first things that Navy SEALs are taught is how to make the bed. And it's about a routine, it's about discipline, and it's about getting up and getting out there. So get up, get washed, get dressed. So it's really tempting, particularly if you've not got any one-to-one interaction, to stay in your pajamas, to keep your comfy clothes on. But actually, that doesn't set you up to be motivated during the day. So get up and get washed. Eat breakfast and do one thing that you enjoy in the morning. So if you're struggling to get up, if you're struggling to get going, plan something enjoyable. So it might be meditating, going for a walk, having a chat with a friend on the phone, playing with your kids. So that helps you to start your morning off right. Set small, realistic daily goals. So that might just be 3 things that you want to achieve that you can achieve. And we'll talk a little bit about goal setting in a minute. And try and do a bit of movement in the morning. So have some gentle stretches or a small walk, because again, that sets our bodies up to motivate. So any kind of movement, any kind of activity motivates us, gives us more energy. And follow your daily routine, as we've talked about, with time to work and rest in a way that works for you. So working from home, you've probably had lots of information about working from home, but just to recap some key points. There's going to be distractions. It's going to have challenges. So there's lots of things that can stop you from working at home. You're going to be managing your space with other household members as well. So don't expect the same type of productivity as usual. So as we are going to talk about, if we set a goal too high, that's very, very demotivating. So if we're expecting ourselves to work the same as we normally do with this global pandemic going on, with this whole issue of working from home, it's a very different place. We're not going to do the same productivity as we usually do. So don't set yourself up to fail by expecting that. Try and create a dedicated workspace, so that's the only place where you do your work. Don't work in bed. It doesn't help sleep patterns. It doesn't help motivation, even though it is often the comfiest place in the house. But try and get yourself a little corner somewhere that's where you're maybe a little more free from distractions, or that sets you up that this is where I work. So in terms of reducing distractions, noise cancelling headphones are really helpful. If you find that you're somebody who has your phone beside you and it's really easy just to pick it up and have a quick read of a message there. In fact, I've just had a message come through. Really want to read that, but see how easily it distracts you. So keep your phone away, put it in a different room when you're working, or turn it off. What happens is, once it beeps once, unless you obviously need it for work, once it beeps once, it's easy to get on there, check one message. When you've checked one, then you start checking another 5, and then you're on it for 20 minutes. So as we said, set working hours, be aware of under and overworking. And to help with overworking particularly, have a routine to end your work day. So put away whatever it is that you're working with, and wind down. If you're struggling, talk to your manager about what's appropriate for your own situation in terms of work goals, and possibly reduce things if it's not urgent, if it's difficult at this point in time with lots of other things going on. Regular check-ins with colleagues and managers can help to reduce our social isolation, and this really increases our motivation. And seeing faces on video, it's been lovely today to see everybody's faces out there, because that can help us reduce that sense of social isolation. However, it can also make us feel quite overwhelmed being on Zoom calls all day. So if you do have a lot of screen time, maybe see if you can swap a video call for a phone call. So we're going to talk a little bit now about setting goals. And as I say, you probably all know about setting goals. You've probably all done it before, but it's really good just to go back to basics with this to help us just to motivate ourselves. We are goal-directed creatures, human beings. We like to work towards something. So we want meaning in our life, we want significance, and we want purpose. And goals give us that. They give us something to work towards. So they naturally motivate us. They give us a sense of value and a sense of control in our lives. And these are things that we need at the moment. So, anybody who comes to me who's struggling with anxiety and depression as a result of the pandemic, this is what one of the first things we work on, is setting goals, because it gives us that motivation. It gives us that sense of value and control in our life again. Without goals, we're likely to start suffering from stress, from tension, from depression. But we have to get the balance right, because too many goals, or unachievable goals, that also causes stress, conflict, depression, and anxiety. And it's important that we set goals based on our values. So what's important to us? So we're just going to do a really quick goal planning exercise to identify values. So if you want to write things down on a piece of paper, you can, or if not, just let things come into your mind while we do this. And you can always come back to do this later on in your own time. However, the key to this is we do it quite quickly, because what we're doing is we're not getting involved too much in our thought process, but we're cutting down to that core authentic self part of us that knows our values. So if you want to write this down, just write down your answers. If you want to just think of it in your head, you might want to close your eyes while we do this. So just give yourself 60 seconds now to think, what are the 5 basic values in life that are most important to you? And now we're just going to give ourselves 30 seconds. What are the 3 most important long-term goals? And in another 30 seconds, what would you do if you had 6 months to live? 30 seconds again. How would you change your life if you became an instant millionaire? 30 seconds again. What activities give you the greatest feeling of importance and satisfaction? 30 seconds again. What would you like people to say about you at your funeral? And the last one, 30 seconds again. What have you always wanted to do but have been afraid to attempt? So, what these questions do, and the way that we do them very quickly, is that they cut out our kind of circular thinking patterns that we get into of the what ifs or the oh I can't or I should, and it cuts through into what our true values are. So what are the things that are most important to you in your life? And when we're thinking about setting goals in our life, it's really important that we connect to our values, because that's going to give us that intrinsic motivation. So ideally, whatever we do in work is connected to our values, because if we're not connected to our values, then we're constantly going to have this jarring inside us, and we're going to find it difficult to motivate ourselves. So whenever we're setting a goal, what we want to do is be as creative as possible. So come up with lots of options. So whether this is about where I want to go on holiday, whether it's about what I want to do with my life in 5 years' time, or whether it's about how do I want to solve this problem at work or work on this project, come up with lots of options. Um, and then re-examine these. So what are these goals are not in line with my values, what are incompatible with each other, what are unachievable, and then rewrite your goals in terms of outcome. And yes, we will talk about SMART goals in a minute, which I'm sure that you're all very familiar with. Create action plans, break the goal down into steps, and set short-term and mid and long-term goals, because these are the things that keep us motivated, that we're working towards little steps rather than a long goal. Identify obstacles, whatever we're working towards, whether it's getting up to have a shower because it's so difficult to do that at the moment, or whether it's working on a 6-month project at work. There are going to be obstacles, so we need to identify these and plan for these. Building rewards that we'll talk about in a little bit, and visualize the end result. So practicing optimism in goals. When we are pessimistic about our goals, when we assure that we can't possibly achieve them, then we're not going to be motivated. So we become optimistic about a goal by breaking it down into achievable steps, and we take that approach of slow and steady. So we can't climb a mountain all at once, and we've got a picture there of Everest, which is currently my way of procrastinating. Is I'm watching 101 different YouTube videos about climbing Everest. It's a great way to procrastinate. We'll talk about how not to procrastinate later, but if you do want to procrastinate, watch videos of Everest. But we can't climb a mountain all at once, you know, and as Lao Tzu says, the Chinese philosopher, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So we have to remember that in terms of that activating our motivation. And often, if we have a big goal and we don't break it down, it becomes overwhelming and we can't do it. So I don't know, how long do people think it takes to climb Everest? People want to shout out or write in chat. Anybody brave enough?
2 weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks. Anyone else?
A month?
Yeah,
A month?
2.5.
Sorry, Shannon, I didn't catch that.
4 weeks in the chat box here.
4 weeks, yeah. So normally people take about 2 months to climb Everest. So you have to it takes 10 days to trek to the bottom of it. Then you've got to acclimatize yourself. Then you've got to kind of go up and come down. And then, so it takes like 2 months to do that. Now, none of us, maybe some of us are, but most of us here aren't going to climb Everest. But we do have our own personal Everests. You know, we do have these long-term things going on that actually really suck our motivation away. So it's breaking it down into little steps. And for some of us right now, that really might be getting up in the morning and switching the computer on to go to work, or to making another Zoom call, you know. So just thinking about how we overcome our personal Everest by breaking it down, little steps, rewards in between. And understanding that, you know, things do feel like an Everest right now. So we're back to good old SMART goals. I'm not even going to read it out because I'm presuming that everybody knows about SMART goals. But essentially, we're looking at specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time frames. So making sure whatever goal we do is we have those components to it, because that helps us to understand when we've done it. That helps us to break it down into achievable steps. That keeps our motivation going. And as I say, you can come back to these slides if you're not familiar with SMART goals. So we're going to quickly do a goal achievement visualization. So if you just want to close your eyes, or just drop your eyes down to the floor or away from the screen, just not to distract yourself at the moment. So right now, just allow yourself to relax into the chair you're sitting on. Right now, there's nowhere else to be, there's nothing else to do. Just allow your body to rest. Take a few deep, slow breaths. and simply relax and imagine. So I'd like you to think about a goal you want to accomplish in the next year of your life. So it might be a relationship goal, an educational goal, a personal goal, a work-related goal. And it can be a huge long-term goal or a short-term goal. But take a moment to bring this goal forward and visualize it in your mind's eye. Now, with this goal in mind, I'd like you to imagine yourself going forward in time into the future. Going forward 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. It's now a month into the future and you've started working towards achieving your goal. You're on the road to success. What decisions have you made? What actions have you taken? How does it feel to be on the road to success? Now, using your imagination, continue going forward in time until you're 6 months into the future. You're significantly closer to achieving your goal. You're starting to feel the benefits of all your efforts. What is this like? How does it feel to be this much closer to your goal? Allow yourself to notice any feelings or emotions tied to this moment. Excitement, achievement, pride. And now I'd like you to continue going forward in time until you reach 1 year from now. Here you've fully accomplished your goal, you've achieved success. Visualize yourself in your mind. Where are you? What are you doing? Who are you with, if anyone? What are people saying to you? And what are you saying to them? How does it feel reaching your goal? What emotions are there with this achievement? Feelings of pride or joy, contentment, satisfaction. And now I'd like you to look back on your journey, look back on the process of achieving this goal, look back on all your hard work and effort, and consider how you reached your goal step by step. What were the little things you did day by day to achieve success? What did you do at work? What did you do in your relationships? What did you do internally to achieve success? How did you manage difficult thoughts and emotional obstacles? What coping strategies did you use? Take a moment to consider all the things that helped you manage the personal challenges that appeared along the way. So when you're ready, just become aware of the room around you. If you've got your eyes closed, maybe move around in your seat a little bit. And when you're ready, just open your eyes again. And just bring your attention back to the screen. So we did that super fast, I'm afraid, because I'm conscious of time, but that's a goal visualization that can be really helpful in motivating ourselves. And what I'll do is I'll send Becky a handout of that so you can all access that handout. So it's a really helpful way of just visualizing any goal that we're struggling with. So whether that's a work goal or a personal goal, and it just helps us to increase that motivation by helping us to visualize the goal completed and the steps that we need to take it, including the obstacles. And we can do this at the start to help activate us, to help activate motivation, or we can do this as we're working through a goal to help with that persistence, you know, that staying on task that we need to motivate ourselves. It's really important that we reward ourselves when we're on a long-term task like that. So you can use anything to reward yourself, whatever you find intrinsically motivating. Or if you need some extrinsic motivation, you can pull that in from different places. So identify your personal motivators. So I'm very motivated by food. So anything that I find I struggle to do, I will just give myself food afterwards. Work out whether you're motivated by smaller, more frequent rewards. So after working for 20 minutes, I'll have a nice cup of coffee, or I'll have a stretch, go for a walk. Or are we motivated by a bigger reward at the end of the task? But it is important to motivate ourselves with rewards. Experiment with different strategies. And if we've got a really difficult task, maybe pair that up with an immediate reward. So, for example, I run and I hate running. But if I listen to music, I've got that immediate reward of listening to the music while I run. Making sure that you don't sabotage yourself with your reward. So, for example, if you're trying to lose weight and you're rewarding yourself with a massive cake after every time you exercise, you may be sabotaging your long-term goal. But remember to celebrate the small wins. So we often get focused on the big achievements, but remember to celebrate every single step of your goal. So another way to motivate ourselves that's really important, particularly during this time of pandemic, is connecting with others. So it helps to reduce our loneliness and isolation. It helps to improve our immune system, it helps our memory, and it helps us to motivate ourselves to stay connected with others. So there's lots of ideas there of trying to stay connected during lockdown. And again, you're probably familiar with these, but it's worth just remembering and setting up regular meetings with people, whether that's work colleagues or friends or family. So finding ways of virtually connecting, so coffee breaks, virtual pub, virtual games, have a meal together, watch a film together, regular phone calls if you're not a Zoom person. Even writing letters, you know, do you remember when we used to write letters years and years ago? You know, that can be a really nice way of connecting to people. And in terms of motivation for particularly difficult tasks, we can encourage motivation by connecting with others through regular check-ins. So that might be a work colleague, or it might just be a friend. So I have a friend who checks in whether I've gone for a run in the morning, because that helps me to motivate myself to do it when really I just want to stay in bed. Doing tasks together virtually is another way of motivating yourself. So working on a project together or going for a walk together if we can't meet face to face. And doing difficult tasks at the same time. So it might be a work task or a personal task, and you're not working with that person, but you might agree, right, well, I've got to ring the gas board today and I really don't want to do it. I've been putting off for ages, and I've got to, you know, write this report for work that I've been putting off and I don't want to do. If you motivate yourselves, well, on Tuesday morning, we're both going to do these horrible tasks that we don't want to do, and then we're going to get together and have a coffee virtually. That can really help us to motivate ourselves when we have that sense that somebody else is doing something difficult at the same time. It's really important that we're kind to ourselves at this difficult time. So do not underestimate what the pandemic is doing to our well-being. So be kind to yourself. Don't expect too much from yourself. Remind yourself of what you've achieved and what your strengths are, and practice self-compassion for yourself. Don't beat yourself up for not having any motivation. As we saw from that slide at the beginning, it's no wonder that we're all struggling a little bit right now. So remember, it's okay to have bad days. Accept your emotions, you know, because we are all on a bit of an emotional roller coaster at the moment, and find healthy ways of expressing those emotions. So things like exercise, poetry, connecting with others, listening to music, journaling, whatever. So look after our well-being. There's just a slide there. I'm conscious of time, so it's a general slide about looking after our well-being. We can't be motivated if we're struggling, you know, if we're not sleeping, if we're not eating properly, if we have no fuel in our body, you know, if we're struggling mentally, when emotionally, we're not going to be motivated. So just check in. Do a little check-in with yourself. Am I doing these things? Have I fallen into bad habits? You know, am I staying up too late? Am I relying on coffee and alcohol? Am I eating sugar all the time just to give me energy? And just get back into regular exercise and diet, get back into a good sleep routine. There's some tips there about a good night's sleep. I'm not going to go through all of that now, but you can have a look at the slides later about that. But again, if we want to be motivated, we need to be looking after ourselves. So when it comes to emotions that we're all experiencing at the moment, it's important that we are accepting of the emotions that we're feeling. And these are just some of the normal emotional responses that we might be having right now as a result of the pandemic. So we may be feeling anxious because of risk to health, finances, everything that's going on. We may be feeling confused and conflicted. We may be having unclear information. Information might be changing week by week. We have different, the goalposts keep moving, don't they, about in terms of when we might come out of lockdown, when we go into lockdown, what we can do, what we can't. We may find that we feel distrustful of the government or of the media or of scientists. We may feel confused and conflicted about changes in our relationships to lockdown. So, you know, some of us are maybe feeling that we're under a lot of pressure in our relationships during the pandemic. So it's normal to feel confused and conflicted with everything that's going on. We may be feeling some irritability or anger or frustration at what has changed in our lives, about the rules that we now need to follow. We might be angry or irritated at people not following the rules, or we ourselves might not agree with the rules. And there may have been huge changes in our lives that we're finding difficult, which can result in us feeling that life is unfair, and we might feel frustrated or angry by this. We may be experiencing grief, which is a whole other host of emotions, and that might be due to personal bereavements or the sense of global loss of life that's happened, or also changes to lifestyle, you know, that we can't do the things that we wanted to do. We can't go on holiday, we can't see our friends. So it's normal to experience grief with these losses. And we may be feeling some sense of guilt as well, that actually, you know, the pandemic hasn't hit us that hard. It's been okay for us. We're doing okay. It's been quite nice. Or, you know, as we said, this has been going on a year. We may just not feel anything. We may be feeling completely numb or just so out of compassion, you know, because it's just been going on too long. Feeling trapped or controlled, or equally feeling like we don't want to engage in life as it was before, that feels a bit too much. And it's normal to feel powerless. So the reason why I've included this is because when we're questioning our own motivation, it's important for us to understand what's going on underneath emotionally for us. And all of these emotions are really normal. So given the situation that's going on, it's normal to experience all of these. However, if you're struggling with any of these, if you're finding that motivation is really dropping because your mental health is dropping, do go and get some help with that. So as we said, we need to manage the impact of emotions on motivation. When we feel overwhelmed by all these emotions, just remind ourselves that we all experience these difficult emotions, that these are normal for the situation, and that we can find healthy ways of expressing them. If you've got others to talk to about how you're feeling, do that. And remember that we can often put tasks off that cause uncomfortable emotions, because that lack of motivation is stemming from trying to avoid the discomfort. So when we're trying to avoid something, it's also really easy to distract ourselves. So just acknowledge what is it that is the emotion that you're trying to avoid, because this actually reduces our anxiety about that emotion, and remind ourselves that we can handle this uncomfortable feeling. So what we find is that kind of carrot and stick approach to motivation, that the stick might work initially, but it's not helpful for keeping motivation going. So harsh self-criticism doesn't work. Self-compassion, particularly during difficult times, is more of a motivator than criticism. So remember to treat yourself with kindness and fairness. And there's a little wee exercise there about just encouraging self-compassion, which is something to practice every day, and that helps to motivate us. As I say, these slides will be available. I'm just conscious of the time, so I'm rushing through these to get everything in. So one of the things that's a common myth about motivation is that we feel like we need to be in the mood. You know, we feel like we need to be motivated in order to take action, but actually action increases motivation. So if we just do it, if we just get on and do something, then that often builds in more motivation for us to continue to do it. So tips for that is the 5-minute rule that you might have come across. It's sometimes called the 2-minute rule or the 10-minute rule. But the idea is that you build in a deal with yourself that I'm going to do this task for just 5 minutes or 2 minutes or 10 minutes. And at the end of 5 minutes, if I really want to stop, I'll stop. So we do it for 5 minutes, and then we ask ourselves after 5 minutes, do I want to stop? And 9 times out of 10, we find that we'll keep doing it, because it's usually that getting started that's the hard bit. So this is a really good trick, even when we're feeling dreadfully low in motivation. It's a really good trick just to get ourselves going again, because it proves to us as well that often the task isn't as bad as we think it is. So that's a good way of getting rid of procrastination. And we procrastinate often because we don't feel that we have enough mastery on a task, or that, like I said, we assume we have to be in the mood to do something. We also may procrastinate because we fear rejection or fear intimacy, and that we feel like if we're not very good in a task, we're going to be rejected in some way. We might fear being really good at something as well. And sometimes we may procrastinate because actually we're having a little bit of a rebellion. Don't tell me what to do, I'm not going to do this. Or we lack commitment to a goal. So there's some tips there for managing procrastination. And really what we've talked about before is breaking the task down, checking in on our thinking, planning rewards and reinforcements, and scheduling things. I'm not going to talk about the perfectionism because we're running out of time here, but you can have a look through that in the slides at your own leisure. And there's a little bit there about how we just do it, how we break that lethargy spiral. So how often our thoughts tell us we can't be bothered, we then become avoidant of a task, we feel discouraged, we're more likely to think there's no point, I can't be bothered, and we become stuck in this spiral. So activity makes us feel much more energized, it helps our motivation, it improves our thinking, and it breaks this spiral. So there's some tips there about planning activity, which helps us to start that initial activating point of motivation. So just to finish off, low motivation can be a symptom of something else going on. So if you're finding that you're persistently low in motivation, it can be an indication of some physical illnesses such as anemia or diabetes, stress and anxiety. So if you're experiencing other physical symptoms or a persistent low mood, you find that you're withdrawing from others, and you're really losing interest in things that you previously enjoyed, or you know that you're struggling with your mental health or additional stresses, do get some help with that. So speak to your GP. There's independent counsellors or psychologists out there, and there's also support groups. And then we've also got a few resources there on coping with coronavirus and how it affects our motivation. And there's also some TED Talks there on motivation. There's many different ones there, and it's really worth having a look through and finding a speaker that motivates you, so somebody that really connects to you and your values, and that'll help you just increase that intrinsic motivation. Okay, guys, so is there any questions at all? I think we've got about a minute.
Caroline, do you want to say as well about the mindfulness program coming up?
Yeah, sure. Let me just stop my share. Yeah, so we've got a mindfulness program coming up in March, Mindfulness March. So we've got an introduction next Friday, I think. We've got the introduction.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
So it'd be great to see you all there. So mindfulness is a really good way of also increasing motivation and definitely helping us cope with the pandemic, because it's a way of being that helps us to stay in the present moment rather than getting caught up in anxieties of the future or worrying about the past. So we'll be doing an introduction to mindfulness on Friday. If you are already planning to come along, please bring a little bit of food with you. So either a little bit of fruit or some chocolate, because we're going to do a mindfulness and eating exercise. And we'll do an introduction there of how and why we might want to do mindfulness and how it can help us.
Is it possible you could send this PowerPoint presentation via email to people, or make it available?
So I can send it to Becky, and then Becky, you can pass it on.
Yeah, I can sort that out for you, not a problem, Neil.
Right, thank you, Becky.
Any other questions?
No, that's it. Yeah, thank you very much indeed.
Brill.
I'll need some cake now, and that's it. Jobs are good.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Cheers. Bye bye.
Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you, Caroline.